This story became one of the most discussed in Europe in the year 2023. Amazing was not only the event itself, but also the age of the participants. The reason for the conflict between the participants of this incident was so minor that leading psychologists could not understand how such a thing could happen. Some participants of this story remain anonymous in this video as the law of the country prescribes. Louisa, the heroine of our today's story, lived in Germany and turned 12 years old in the year 2023. She attended the local school and achieved good results. Louisa was modest and shy, which was sometimes interpreted by her peers as weakness. She avoided conflicts, which is why some children began to harass her. Despite her young age, Louisa experienced hostility from her fellow humans without apparent reason. Some girls began to pressure her strongly, and it seemed as if this would never end. Louisa decided to cope with the difficulties that had emerged by herself. She decided not to involve her parents and also not to ask for help from the teachers. Two girls aged 12 and 13 years regularly waited for her after class and accompanied her home with mocking remarks. They chose the moment so that adults would not notice their actions. The situation remained difficult even during class. During breaks, the girls found ways to make Louisa look ridiculous in front of the other students without the teachers noticing. Earlier, they had all been good friends, but after an argument, their relationship deteriorated. Louisa hoped that everything would work out again and they could be friends again, like before. But the situation only worsened, and after a couple of months, it happened daily. It seemed as if the girls came to school intentionally to continue this way. Louisa was afraid to react to their behavior. Nevertheless, she tried to talk to them, but unsuccessfully. Their impunity only encouraged the girls to further actions. Sometimes it even came to physical altercations, but they did this inconspicuously to avoid consequences. Therefore, Louisa began to be afraid of going to school. Her parents noticed changes in her mood. They tried to find out the reason for her dejection, but Louisa preferred to remain silent, out of fear that the situation might worsen if she told adults about it. She still hoped to be able to cope with everything alone. Louisa initially did not want to get involved in conflicts, as she knew that her two classmates were stronger. She tried to clarify the situation with words, but their behavior became increasingly unbearable. One day, Louisa threatened to tell everything to the adults. Then the friends again lay in wait for her after class and said there would be serious consequences if the adults found out about it. Louisa was at a loss. Attempts at persuasion were useless, and threats with the adults did not help either. She had no strength to fight, but she could no longer endure the endless teasing. The next day, everything repeated itself. The girls began to annoy her even before class and did not stop all day. Finally, Louisa decided to act differently. During one of the breaks, she went to a teacher and told him everything. The teacher was surprised and immediately spoke with the friends. Louisa did not go into detail, therefore the teacher limited himself to a conversation, hoping that this would help. Louisa confirmed that she was being followed during every break, and it seemed as if the classmates were afraid of punishment. After the conversation, they went away and left her alone for the rest of the day. Louisa felt relief and hoped that her suffering was over. On Friday, the 10th of March 2023, the girls who had caused her inconveniences for a long time came to her with an unexpected reconciliation offer. Later, they suggested to Louisa to come to their house on Saturday to spend the evening together and improve relations. It was expected that all three friends would come together, drink tea, and watch something together. The friends even apologized to Louisa and explained that they had simply overdone it with their jokes. For Louisa, this was great joy, because just one day earlier she did not know how to stop the unpleasant events at school. Now her relationships with the friends began to improve, as she had dreamed. Louisa accepted the invitation joyfully and apologized for having complained to the teacher. She explained that she could no longer endure the unpleasant situations and therefore had to take this step. The girls assured her that they understood. The tension in the friendly relationship seemed to have disappeared. On the 11th of March, a Saturday, the friends met to spend the evening together as planned. On this day, Luisa's parents noticed how their daughter had changed. In recent months, she had often been dejected, spent much time in her room, and avoided contact. She did not want to go to school, but now everything seemed to have changed. Luisa was finally smiling again and was in good spirits. Luisa's mother was glad that her daughter was sociable again and gladly let her go to her friends. The woman knew about the conflict and was happy that the girls had restored their friendly relationships. She understood how difficult it was for her shy daughter to find friends, and this pleased her as much as Luisa herself. The girls did not live far from each other. Between their houses lay a small forest, but one could also go via city streets. Luisa always chose the safe way through the city. After lunch, she went to her friend. When Luisa arrived at her friend's, she called her mother to say that everything was fine. She planned to stay at her friend's for a few hours and return home before 6 o'clock in the evening. Luisa was always responsible and normally adhered to this schedule. But on this day, she was late. Luisa's mother began to worry and called her daughter when she did not come home on time, but the phone did not answer. 15 minutes had already passed and the girl was still not back. Calls remained unanswered and messages were not read. The mother's worry grew, and she called the friend's house. She said that Luisa had left more than 30 minutes ago and should already be at home. Luisa's parents, after several unsuccessful calls, decided to go looking for her. They got in the car and drove the route that their daughter should have taken several times. They checked the shops along the way, but she was nowhere to be found. The people they approached had not seen anyone who looked like Luisa. All the time, her phone remained unreachable. Finally, the parents decided to call the police. They filed a missing person report and provided all necessary information for the search. The community of the small town in which Luisa and her family lived was so closely connected that the report about the disappearance of a 12-year-old girl triggered great concern among the residents. The police officers responded to this event with appropriate seriousness, as it involved a child. Although the city counted only about 17,000 inhabitants, many of them knew each other, which underscored the importance of this case. Most residents had families and children, and their safety had top priority. To organize the search for Luisa, the police turned to the media and volunteers, who received significant support from the community. The media coverage directed the attention of a broad public to the search actions. Dog units and aviation were involved in the operation, but darkness made the search more difficult. The next day, volunteers and search teams intensified their efforts to find the missing girl. At the same time, the investigators conducted conversations with two friends of Luisa who had seen her on the evening before her disappearance. The girls were understandably disturbed and frightened. The parents were also concerned and feared for the safety of their children. At this moment, many in the area feared a child kidnapper. The focus of the search lay on the houses of the girls, while the police conducted investigations in the school where all three children studied. Suspicious was information that Luisa had told the teacher about her friends, but all this seemed insignificant, and nothing suspicious was discovered. On Sunday afternoon, a group of volunteers moved between the girls' houses through the forest. In this forest, there was a path that represented a shorter way to Luisa's house. Although she had never walked this way, it was nevertheless decided to check this possibility. This proved to be the right decision. About 3 kilometers from Luisa's house, near the old train station, the girl was found. Her head was covered, and her clothing was heavily soiled. An examination revealed her identity. It was the missing Luisa. The medical report showed clear signs of violence. The investigators found signs of a physical confrontation, but could not find substantial evidence. The most important thing was that nothing else was discovered here, which considerably complicated the search for the responsible party or parties. According to the authorities, They were dealing with a person who harbored strong antipathy against the girl. The nature of the evidence suggested that this person was in a state of excitement. The procedure happened apparently cold-bloodedly without showing any emotions. It was suspected that this aggression might possibly have been triggered by personal motives. The investigators began to examine Luisa's environment more closely. She was a quiet and modest girl who never came into contact with questionable groups or dangerous people. She had no bad habits and did not suffer from mental illnesses. Luisa came from a wealthy and decent family. Her parents also had no problems with the law or their environment. The investigators decided to speak again with Luisa's female friends, who were 12 and 13 years old at this time. They hoped that the girls had noticed something suspicious, perhaps that someone was following Luisa. But the friends had not noticed anything unusual. Nevertheless, this conversation brought something to light. While the police officers continued to ask questions, one of the girls could no longer bear it and admitted that they were to blame. After that, she covered her face with her hands and began to cry. This news was so surprising that even the investigators initially thought it was a joke. But the girl insisted on telling the truth while crying and asked her parents for forgiveness. Under normal circumstances, the police immediately arrest a person who confesses to an offense. But this time, the case involved two girls, aged 12 and 13 years, and according to state laws, they are not criminally responsible. This news shocked the parents of the students and the local community. After a conversation with the juveniles in the presence of their parents and lawyers, the words of the girl who had confessed first could be confirmed. Her friend also confirmed her involvement. The girls described in detail what had happened and explained that they had not liked their old friend for several months because of minor quarrels. They became very angry when Luisa told the teacher about their behavior. The girls thought their actions would remain without consequences, but out of fear that the parents would be called to school, they decided to act. They invited Luisa to their home under the pretext of reconciliation to gain her trust and keep her away from the adults. The plan was to discuss all disagreements once and for all. When Luisa came to visit, the girls initially gained her trust. They drank tea and watched some videos on the internet. Everything went smoothly. When Luisa set out on her way home, the older one suggested accompanying her through the forest and explained that this was a shorter way to her home. When they were together, they felt safe and could talk calmly with each other. Luisa's friend, unaware of what was to come, agreed to meet. It was the last time that Luisa's parents saw her. According to their statements, it was about 5:30 in the evening. The girls left the house and went a little further to avoid attracting attention from passers-by. At some point, the friends accused Luisa of having betrayed them, and a quarrel broke out between them. The younger of them became physical. Luisa tried to defend herself, but the older friend also intervened. After that, they left Luisa at the spot. The investigators could not initially believe what had happened, since the girls came from normal families and had no problems with the law. At first, it was thought that an older juvenile was involved, but the girls insisted that no one else was there. For the investigation, evidence had to be collected and fingerprints as well as DNA had to be compared. The girls admitted to having thrown everything away in the nearby forest but could not remember the exact location. They managed to walk with Luisa to the old train station where she was later found. Almost everything that was used in this case was thrown away near the scene of the incident. Investigators thoroughly searched the entire area. Nevertheless, the police could not find important pieces of evidence. According to the girls, it was a household item that could be key evidence in the case. It would show exactly who held it during the incident. The police still believed that the girls were hiding something and hoped to find a third person who might have left traces or fingerprints. Nevertheless, the juveniles persisted in their version of events. The final judgment lay with the criminalists and forensic medical examiners. On Luisa's hands, traces were found that indicated defensive actions. She defended herself as long as she could until she was overwhelmed and her resistance died out. The investigation revealed that only the DNA of 3 persons was found at the scene. that of Louisa herself and that of the two acknowledged students. Finally, the police recognized the girl's statements as credible. No evidence was found for the presence of another person. According to German law, criminal responsibility begins at 14 years. Therefore, neither of the girls could be arrested or punished. Nevertheless, all documents were handed over to the youth office, which was to take over the further work with the juveniles. On Monday, the school in which the juveniles studied opened its doors again. Psychologists came to offer help and support to the frightened students. The specialists worked in the school for 3 days and postponed classes. They conducted conversations with the students who were particularly severely affected and organized group meetings in the classes. The psychologists helped the teachers to establish contact with the children and understand their condition. Even after the 3 days, they continued their meetings with the students. After that, classes were resumed in normal mode. As a sign of respect, the national flags throughout the city were set at half-mast. On the 22nd of March, a private farewell ceremony took place at the request of the parents. At the place where Louisa was found, the city residents set up an improvised monument. It turned out that the girls showed little signs of remorse for what had happened, although they cried at the police station. They recovered quickly and showed no special compassion. Shortly thereafter, they showed behavior on social media that many perceived as inappropriate and carefree. Later, their accounts were deleted due to numerous complaints. They communicated calmly with their peers as if nothing had happened. It is known that they were handed over to the youth authority for some time, where psychologists and psychiatrists worked with them. It was necessary to find out whether they had any psychological problems and whether they needed treatment. According to the laws of the country, they will not be held accountable for what happened. The investigation procedure that was conducted by the prosecutor's office is completed and the case was closed. No evidence was found to suspect anyone else. The prosecutor emphasized that emotions played an important role in this case. Louisa's parents were deeply shaken and could not accept this decision. They could not come to terms with the fact that those responsible did not have to bear the expected consequences. Their indignation and active actions drew public attention to this incident. The situation was discussed at all levels, and the question arose about the deficiencies of the German legal system. The public was outraged that a legal system that allows such events cannot adequately punish the guilty. The mass dissatisfaction led to the families of the youth involved in the incident being forced to leave the city. The parents of these youth were constantly criticized by the locals, who were troubled by what had happened and did not want to live near them. Finally, the families moved away due to the unfavorable conditions. Meanwhile, the youth themselves remain in a state institution and their parents maintain contact with them. Ultimately, it is the parents of these youth who have suffered the most from their children's actions. Due to strict German laws that protect confidentiality, the details of this case remained unknown for a long time. The story that will be discussed here makes us think about the disturbing side of human nature. Psychiatrists note that some perpetrators find pleasure in stalking their victims. Ellen Wake, affectionately called Ellie by her relatives, was born in Minneapolis, Minnesota. She had a quiet life and caring parents. The young woman was artistically inclined. She was interested in scrapbooking, dance, made jewelry from simple metals, and loved music very much. Shortly after Ellie's birth, the Wake family moved to West Chester, Ohio. There she lived with her parents and her pet, a gecko. From an early age, she showed great curiosity and could even dirty her most beautiful dress if something caught her attention. Nature was her passion. She wanted to explore everything around her without worrying about trivial things like soiled clothing. Over time, Ellie's circle of interests steadily expanded. She began growing plants, sewed hammocks, and received her cosmetology license in the summer of 2018. The young woman dreamed of becoming self-employed, and as she said, making the world a little more beautiful. Everything was going well until one day Ellie received an unpleasant message from a hidden profile on social media. Initially, she paid no attention to it and thought it was just a failed joke. The situation gradually became more and more worrying. Ellie received strange messages daily on social networks from various unknown profiles. Blocking attempts did not solve the problem. As soon as one account was deleted, a new one appeared, sometimes on the same day. A similar situation had occurred a year ago, but at that time everything stopped quickly. After a few blockings, the unwanted messages disappeared. Now the unknown person showed persistence and used various platforms and devices, which caused serious concerns in the young woman, which she shared with her relatives. But that was just the beginning. After about a month of such pressure, Ellie received a video recording that showed her in her kitchen. The sender had filmed her through the window from outside and then added inappropriate recordings of himself. The situation clearly went beyond ordinary internet harassment and took on a threatening character. It became obvious that the stalker knew Ellie's address, which is why she decided to contact the police. She frequently discussed the situation with her friend Hannah, who was very worried about her safety. It was Hannah who insisted on the immediate involvement of law enforcement authorities and convinced Ellie that only they could provide the necessary protection. Thereupon, Ellie went to the police station and filed an official report. The young woman presented the investigators with a complete description of the events, including photos, disturbing messages, and the aforementioned disturbing video. The investigators tried to find out whether the pursuer could have known Ellie. She had only one suspicion. One of the accounts was called Mickey, and she had once known an acquaintance named Michael. Although their relationship did not end well, she believed that he had no reason for such behavior. Everything had happened a year ago. He had long since broken off contact and had presumably moved on with his life. The law enforcement representatives advised her to take self-defense courses and avoid nightly walks. Despite her seeking help, the situation did not seem to cause them particular concern. After another complaint, it became clear, since the unknown person had formally not violated any laws, they could not take any measures. Ellie took the recommendations seriously and began attending self-defense courses together with her mother. However, this did not change the situation. The disturbing messages continued to come almost daily. The investigators could not trace the source of these messages due to the complex encryption system. It was obvious that the sender was carefully hiding his identity. Although there were possibilities to circumvent the protection, this required considerable time. The law enforcement officers showed no particular zeal in the investigations, and Ellie had to cope with the situation alone. She hoped for a quick end to this nightmare, but the fear only grew. In the week after the report to the police, the unknown person appeared twice near the house. Even Ellie's mother saw him. Both times the woman went out to inspect the premises but found no one. The arriving patrol officers could also discover no one. Unfortunately, the constant pressure showed its effect. After these events, Ellie began to fear being alone in the house. Friends often stayed overnight with her, and the mother also tried to be nearby so that her daughter could find at least some peace. The mysterious pursuer effortlessly penetrated onto the property without leaving traces. During this time, Ellie was in a depressive state and suffered from insomnia. All her thoughts were occupied only with questions of personal safety and self-defense. Fortunately, after just a week, an important clue appeared. Ellie discovered a new Snapchat account under the name Mickey. She remembered that her former partner was named Michael Strauss. After weighing the facts, the young woman turned to law enforcement authorities again. But the same officer ignored her concern again. In the police's view, they had more important cases to handle than dealing with the young woman's former admirers. Ellie's acquaintance with Michael began through common interests: art, music, and parties. But soon the relationship deteriorated due to his manipulative and domineering behavior. Michael insisted on strange role-playing games for which Ellie was not ready. When she recognized the warning signs, she decided to end the relationship after a month. Michael reacted inappropriately and showed his true nature. After a series of unpleasant messages, the young woman changed her phone number and contact was broken off. It seemed as if everything had calmed down. On the 28th of July 2018, Ellie was writing with her new boyfriend, Nate. They planned to meet, but she was worried about late walks. Nate offered to come to her himself. He mentioned that he would leave his phone at home and simply knock on the door. Initially, Ellie hesitated as she wanted to be alone, but was still worried about possible pursuit. Nate promised to protect her, and she agreed. That evening, Ellie felt tired and wanted to rest. For the first time in a long time, no friends were in the house. She carried out her usual ritual, checked all doors and windows to create at least an illusion of safety before going to sleep. Unfortunately, the young woman did not suspect that she was not communicating with the real Nate, but with a fake account that completely copied her friend's profile. After this evening, Ellie never contacted anyone again. The relatives could not reach the young woman, and the mother, filled with worry, immediately turned to the police. The woman was convinced that it was connected to an intrusive admirer who had been harassing Ellie for a long time. Her car stood untouched in front of the house, as if it had not been used on the day of the disappearance. In the house, there were no traces of her presence. Phone, social media, and bank cards remained inactive. The investigators concentrated on analyzing the last mobile phone data to determine the identity of the pursuer. They discovered a message exchange with a certain Nate, whose number was registered in another city and was fake. The verification of the real Nate showed his innocence. The young man had a solid alibi for the evening of the incident. It became clear that someone had created a convincing false profile, gained Ellie's trust, and obtained information about her being alone at home. The SIM card was purchased through a special website, which made the search for the buyer difficult. After a few days, the owner of the card could be determined. As Ellie had suspected, it was her former boyfriend, Michael Strauss. Unfortunately, 2 weeks of searching brought no information about the whereabouts of the young woman. When checking Michael's past, it turned out that he had accumulated a long list of offenses over 10 years. Among them were inappropriate behavior in public, distribution of prohibited substances, manipulation of foreign data, and apartment break-ins. In June 2015, the young man was charged with indecent behavior in public, which raised doubts about his mental health. After a medical evaluation, the court ordered forced treatment. Later, he began creating fake accounts on various social networks through which he harassed many young women. All messages were sent from his hometown. From there was also registered the last number from which Michael contacted Ellie on that fateful night. Significantly, this number was disconnected exactly on the day of her disappearance. On the 24th of August, almost a month after Ellie's disappearance, a disturbing discovery was made in a field near the city. This happened on a road in Butler district, several kilometers from the location. The law enforcement officers were convinced of a connection between the find and the missing person case. Time and weather conditions made the investigators' work considerably more difficult. A special investigation was required. A package wrapped with adhesive tape was found at the roadside. The experts found signs that the person had been subjected to severe trials. After thorough investigation, the specialists determined the circumstances of the incident. Noteworthy was that the discovery site was only a few walking minutes across a field from Michael Strauss's house. The whole time, the public and journalists followed the search for Ellie with concern. Family and friends did not give up hope of finding the young woman. They believed that she was somewhere and could be rescued. Unfortunately, a message from the police station destroyed all their hopes. In the early morning, at 4 o'clock, the officers arrested the main suspect. The arrest of Michael Strauss caused great sensation. The police had to make great efforts to keep the crime scene undisturbed. The area was cordoned off. Specialists worked there. Drones flew over the suspect's house and documented the events. Michael was taken into custody with the possibility of being released on bail of $4 million. He was immediately classified as particularly dangerous. Parallel to this, Thorough searches of his apartment and the crime scene were conducted. The experts found biological traces of Michael. The examination of his computer and phone showed that numerous online accounts and numbers were registered from his address. He constantly changed them to continue pursuing his goal even after blocks. In the search history, information was found about various unlawful actions, legal knowledge, and possible penalties. He showed particular interest in a case of a perpetrator from Cincinnati. The last such search was conducted on the 18th of July, 10 days before the young woman's disappearance. In the following days, he searched for information about life in correctional institutions and their unwritten rules. Obviously, the perpetrator was aware of the severity of his actions and understood the inevitability of the consequences. Most disturbing was that he showed no fear, but prepared methodically. He searched for ways to irrevocably delete photos from iCloud. In the breaks between preparations, he looked at forbidden materials with particularly disturbing content. Some of the search queries discovered by the investigators were so frightening that it was decided not to publish them. By many signs, Michael posed a serious threat to society, and his actions might not have been limited to one incident. As confirmation of this, many recordings and pictures of women who exercised in city parks were found on his devices. Presumably, he observed those who regularly trained in secluded places. It is very likely that they were all in danger and only by chance escaped an encounter with him, unlike Ellie, for whom he had a special plan. However, the psychiatrists who examined his behavior also considered a less dangerous scenario possible. Some people with abnormalities content themselves with observing others. However, evidence soon surfaced that confirmed the worst fears. Michael repeatedly followed potential victims with his car and even tried to make contact, but fortunately the women managed to escape. The new data had to be verified and the list of incidents possibly expanded. In the suspect's phone, a map was found with a marking not far from the place where Ellie was later discovered. The circumstances appeared suspicious and required verification, but the investigation remained fruitless. After his arrest, Michael remained calm. His strange internet searches and found materials he explained with preparation for horror film shoots. According to his statements, he was fascinated by amateur film and dreamed of creating his own masterpiece. His unusual behavior toward Ellie and the surveillance he also justified with acting preparation. Allegedly, he wanted to write a credible script about a stalker, make test recordings, and find favorable perspectives. All of this was, as Strauss claimed, only a creative experiment. He had not forewarned Ellie because he wanted to capture her sincere emotions during the events. However, the prosecution came to a completely different assessment. The decisive evidence consisted of objects found by the investigators in Michael's room. There they found Ellie's documents, a strand of her hair and a pink necklace. The parents identified the jewelry and confirmed that the young woman had never taken it off. The experienced investigators noticed that the found objects resembled a souvenir collection. It is known that some perpetrators keep personal objects of their victims to later remember their deeds. During interrogations, Michael behaved challengingly and arrogantly. It seemed as if he was deliberately trying to unsettle the police officers. He showed no remorse and constantly sought justifications for his actions. Michael claimed he did not understand why the incident happened near his house. According to his words, Ellie had left all the found objects herself during their relationship. Of course, this was a lie. The young woman never took off her jewelry and always carried her driver's license with her. Fortunately, the suspect began to tell the truth under pressure from the investigators. After several hours of interrogation, Michael changed his statement and described what happened as unintentional. According to his version, he had agreed with Ellie to film a movie of special content, for which he had promised her a large sum of money. On the day of her disappearance, he drove to her house and knocked on the door. After a brief conversation, Ellie came out, wrapped in a blanket. Michael explained this with her desire to hide from the curious glances of neighbors. They arrived at Michael's house, where he began filming in the basement. According to his information, everything happened consensually, but the situation got out of control. Later, Strauss explained that he had deleted the recording and thrown away the memory card. The suspect's version aroused doubts among the investigative authorities. During the search of his house, a strange room with a bed and handcuffs was discovered in the basement. The experts thoroughly examined this place and found important evidence, traces of Ellie's presence there, which was later confirmed by DNA tests. The investigators did not believe Michael's statements about the young woman's voluntary participation in his projects. They knew how he had lured her out of the house under the pretext of a new acquaintance. Ellie's relatives also categorically denied the possibility of her consent to such recordings. Obviously, she was in this basement against her will. Particularly disturbing was how calmly Michael spoke about the final moments of the incident, as if it were an everyday matter for him. After his arrest, reports came to the police from people who were convinced of this person's involvement in other incidents. Despite the conscientious work of the investigators, the help of the FBI was required to uncover the full extent of his activities both on the internet and in real life. The agents examined his psychological profile and analyzed extensive digital evidence. Finally, Michael was charged with several serious crimes with aggravating circumstances, including evidence tampering and other offenses. The evidence base comprised more than 800 pages, and all materials were presented to the jury during the trial. However, the defense held to a different version of events. The lawyer claimed that Ellie had consented to the recording herself and understood the possible consequences. He insisted that there was no premeditated intent. The defender tried to build a version according to which Ellie had problems with her mental state, and what happened could be connected with incorrect medication intake. But the prosecution had the results of a medical examination that showed the absence of any medications or alcohol in the young woman's organism. The lawyer's assumptions about her mental state deeply affected the relatives, because Ellie's unrest arose precisely from Michael's persistent attention. After the preliminary hearings, the accused surprisingly confessed his guilt. For the family, this meant the end of an exhausting process. They did not have to hear all the difficult details of what happened. However, this decision also led to a reduction in punishment. At least 6 charges were dropped as part of a plea agreement. In the final session, Strauss addressed Ellie's relatives with an extensive speech and expressed his regret about what happened. "Please, believe me from the bottom of my heart. I never wanted to harm anyone. If there were a way to change everything, I would exchange places with Ellie without hesitation." The relatives of the young woman perceived these words as further manipulation. Later, the mother of the young man met personally with Ellie's family to express her deep regret. She could not comprehend that she had raised a person for all these years who was capable of such a thing. Her remorse sounded much more sincere. The prosecution insisted on the maximum sentence. The defense predictably asked for leniency. Michael was sentenced to a long prison term with the possibility of early release after 15 years. Additionally, he received 1.5 years for stalking and threats, as well as 1 year for inappropriate behavior. All sentences must be served consecutively. In the judge's opinion, the defendant deserved a chance for improvement. Taking into account the time already spent in custody, his first opportunity for release will arise in the year 2036, the next in the year 2041. This decision caused outrage in the Wake family. They announced they would be present at every commission meeting to prevent his release. Many were still troubled by the question of the reasons for what happened. Why did Michael do this 1 year after the separation? Why could he not continue living? He himself gave no clear explanation and continued to speak of a coincidence during the recording. The prosecution suspected that the recording might actually have been made, but under other circumstances, due to unhealthy intentions. After Michael's imprisonment, Ellie's relatives turned to the prosecutor's office. The relatives demanded that all law enforcement officers be held accountable who could not help the young woman when she asked for protection. An internal investigation was initiated. It turned out that one of the investigators had committed serious violations. He did not maintain proper documentation and did not conduct a thorough investigation of Ellie's reports of stalking. As a result, this officer was suspended from duty. In prison, Michael shared disturbing information about Ellie with his cellmate and indicated that she was not the only victim. This confirmed the police's fears and witness statements that Michael had also stalked women before. In conversation with his cellmate, he mentioned a certain Shelley, whom he had treated similarly and whom he subsequently left at a creek near the city. The police checked this information but found no confirmation. In January 2018, a report about an incident in the park was received by the police. An unknown person in a black hooded sweatshirt and mask attacked a young woman while jogging. He tried to drag her into the bushes and demanded that she remain silent. Fortunately, she was able to break free and run away. Michael is also being examined for a possible connection to another sensational unsolved case. Caitlin Markham disappeared in August 2011 from her house in Fairfield, Ohio. This happened after a party at which Michael was present. At this event, Caitlin photographed herself with her boyfriend and Michael. In the year 2013, disturbing findings related to her disappearance were made in Cedar Grove, Indiana. The investigators discovered similar methods in this incident as in other cases. The investigations continue to this day. There are suspicions about this person's involvement in other similar cases, but so far, not enough evidence could be found.